Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Seminole Sidelines with you live, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Here on the Osceola's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Joined by Osceola senior writer Curt Weiler. I'm editor Bob Ferrante. Lots to discuss. We'll cover a ton of football. We'll jump into baseball. Not so much just what happened Tuesday night against the Gators, but we'll kind of look big picture, what we think might be going on with Wyatt Crowell and how that impacts the rotation. Potentially some positive news there with Wyatt being back in the mix, desperately needed for the Seminoles baseball team. But today, Curt, we begin with football. We have to begin with football, right? Because the Seminoles were back on the practice field Tuesday afternoon. Good practice, I thought. Mike Norvell is going to say he wasn't thrilled with certain things because you're coming back off spring break, and that's going to happen when a team is away for 10 days. But your overall thoughts and then observations of the offense as we kind of start our football discussion here.
Yeah, I think he didn't exactly give them much of a easing back in. It was a pretty intense practice. It was a fully padded practice. I think it was definitely a bit of a let's see, like how much you took it easy on spring break versus how much you kind of like stayed on the grind, even if it was spring quote unquote break. And yeah, I think I liked a lot of what I see. It speaks to how far Florida State's come. I think that Mike Norvell harped on. I think he really, the one thing he liked, I think generally, or talked about generally liking what he saw. The one thing was kind of tempo and like kind of the downtime between reps, the downtime between drills. And I think, that speaks to how far they've come. That there's no longer having to day in and day out push about effort, push about execution, anything like that. I think it's more. He thinks they understand it now and they have the depth now, or I think they can move a little faster. And I think that's a emphasis, I'm sure, of this spring before the fall. Kind of getting that better tempo of practice, I'm sure, going before fall camp rolls around. Looking at the offensive side of the ball, I thought, one guy who I think had maybe the two catches of the day was Kentron Portier. I thought he had a really nice day. I know one play in one-on-ones against AZ Thomas where kind of a nice ball down the sideline from AJ Duffy, but maybe a bit overthrown, and Kentron just kind of reaches out and one hand grabs and cradles it in. It was pretty impressive. And I know he had a nice vertical catch on a high pass from Duffy later in practice as well. I've been impressed by AJ Duffy. I think, it was another, pretty good day for me. He had an interception later in the practice, but he was scrambling and it looked like he slipped as he was throwing. So there was like no power behind the throw. It was a weird situation. I don't kind of put too much fault on him for that one. But yeah, I think we saw AJ hit the freshman wall pretty hard. And I think 4 practices into this spring, I think he's I don't know if it was the break was good for him. I don't know if just kind of the confidence of coming into year 2 and maybe have a bit better understanding of what's happening. Maybe it's someone like Brock Glenn being there to breathe down his neck and kind of competing with Tate Rodemaker for that backup spot. But I've been impressed with what I've seen from AJ Duffy.
Yeah, I am too. I'm with you. I think Brock Glenn has looked really, really good, held his own too through 4 practices. Again, have to remind he's 17 going on 18 and playing against grown men, 22, 23 years old. Mike Norvell was also asked about Micah Pittman. This was his first media availability since Micah went on YouTube and explained his offseason hip surgery and offered up a rough timeline for his rehabilitation. I thought, Mike Norvell mentioned a couple of players from that wide receiver group. I believe the first guy he mentioned was Vandrevius Jacobs. So if this is the spring where we thought a freshman early enrollee might break out, and I know a lot of people thought that name might be Hakeem Williams, it is he is looking good, yes. Vandrevius Jacobs, the way he runs routes, it's very crisp. There's a lot of speed. There's a lot of fluidity there. I think he's been, I don't want to say the most impressive freshman so far, but Curt, is he up there maybe among the guys you've seen, again, just through 4 practices?
Yeah, I would say so among the freshmen for sure. I think, he's a guy who the route running is so smooth. I think kind of back to back a one-on-one reps. And one-on-one's not truly indicative of everything because I think it suits a player like him, but I think 2 straight one-on-one reps, he kind of ran really crisp, smooth, kind of just crossing patterns, a post route or a slant, something like that, and got the inside leverage on ventral Cypress. And I think his quickness, I think, just helps him in that regard. And I mean, you wonder, I think we can agree that I think Hakeem Williams has the better ceiling, but I am fascinated to see, is Vandrevius a guy who's maybe more ready right away to make an impact? I mean, I know that you look at, I mean, the senior season he had, I think second in the state among all high school receivers in yards, first in touchdowns, definitely very productive, and blew up a bit kind of after committing to Florida State. And I mean, it might be a diamond in the rough that really showcases how deep I think that that wide receiver signing class can be. I mean, going beyond the obvious we saw in Hakeem Williams.
Yeah, we've seen some good stuff from the newcomers. Kyle Morlock continues to show you that he belongs at this level. I think I had, I won't say personal concerns, but just questions how a Division II guy is going to blend in at the Power 5 level. But Kyle Morlock is definitely showing that he belongs. And of course, we'll see what the coaches say after the scrimmages, because once Kyle's going up against some big defensive ends and linemen, it'll be interesting to see just how he holds up in pass protection and things like that. Okay, well, Curt, let's move on to the defense. I think one of the fun things that I like just watching the practice when they were indoors, a lot of the linebackers and defensive guys put on the punching bags, and they were trying to strip, literally punch the ball out of other defensive players. Kind of a fun drill, and I think if you're trying to make spring practice amusing, more entertaining for the players, maybe just for those watching, it's a neat little piece of insight into what Mike Norvell and the staff have done with the players. I know this isn't the first year they've done that, but just a fun kind of moment I thought as part of a segment with their drills. Other defensive observations that you've had from Tuesday?
I mean, it was a day of true freshmen in a way. I think, I mean, KJ Kirkland had an interception early in practice. Quindarius Jones had an interception later in practice. Neither of them, I guess, kind of exceptional plays. I think more maybe a right place, right time. But, I mean, they took advantage of the moment. And I think both of them, I mean, playing time won't be easy to come by when you look at kind of the current secondary. If they want to have kind of roles right away, like Azareye'h Thomas had last year, I think they kind of have to show it. And so promising for them. I think it was a day that really showed me, I mean, it drilled home, I think, how not less than 100% Jared Verse and Fabian Levitt were for a decent amount of last season. Both of them, I mean, really good on the day. And I think both of them had talked pretty candidly about, I mean, like, yeah, we were giving what we could, but we weren't 100%. Like, I think both of them kind of suffered injuries in the second and third game of the season, both early, and both, I mean, returned to varying degrees, but I think both were kind of playing at less than 100%, and they both were impressive. I mean, and they didn't do a ton of team stuff. They kind of did some team stuff at the end, but I think even in like the one-on-one or two-on-one type drills, just, I mean, whoever offensive lineman they're putting up against them, and really that's not an indictment of the offensive line anymore, because I think we are both pretty high on that group. Just both of them had good days, and Daryl Jackson and Josh Farmer, the former high school teammates, I think both had really good days as well. Their strength is evident. I mean, Josh Farmer, we talked to him last night, and he is right. I mean, that group is 3 deep, and it's encouraging. I mean, they don't even have Braden Fisk back yet, but Braden Fisk, I know, had a moment where he stood out, even if he wasn't kind of practicing yet.
Yeah, I know you got a chance to talk to Josh Farmer a little bit after practice. I was checking in with Lawrence Toafili. Lawrence, he said his priority is to be a better runner between the tackles. To that end, he's gained about 10 pounds of strength and muscle. He feels like that'll make him more effective between the tackles. He kind of had an interesting facial expression. I think he knows that's a criticism of his game. He knows he's viewed as a receiver out of the backfield, and that it's not the strength of what he can bring to the table is running between the tackles, but he knows there's an opportunity there. I mean, with Trayshawn Ward moving on to K-State, and look, who gets the number 2 reps, the number 3 reps at running back? We know Trey Benson's going to get a ton of carries, but there's Rodney Hill, there's Keziah Holmes. there's Lawrence Toafili, there's CJ Campbell. There's a lot of options in that room. I think Toafili is making his case for being in that mix. You talked to Joshua Farmer a little bit. Just some of your takeaways from that interview.
Yeah, he talked about, I mean, some of the lessons learned from last year. Kind of, he was the guy I think who got thrown into maybe a bigger role than he was ready for when Fabian Lovett went down and missed what I think he missed 5 games, somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't remember offhand, but yeah, I think and I think there were some learning lessons there, especially with how much playing time they kind of had to use him. But I think it was valuable for him and kind of what it taught him in the long term. And I mean, he also talked about, I mean, with that depth that they have there, he talked about Darrell Jackson. I mean, sounds like he said, I think when he's kind of always had that strength, and that's what I think you hear about Darrell Jackson. But he's like, when I met him, he was 6 foot. I think he said 6 foot 197, and now he's like 6'3", 305. But he's like, even when he was that smaller guy, like he had that strength. And I mean, those guys are going to be anchors, I think, both this year. And I mean, you see especially about Darrell Jackson, you see if you get more than 1 year of him, I think he's a guy who there's a world where he's a one and done type going into his third year of college football if he has a good enough year. But yeah, I think Josh talked about when you have kind of 5 or 6 defensive tackles, I think you feel good about, or really depth across the entire defensive line, what that can do for the effort. He was kind of like, I mean, if you're loafing, there's somebody behind you who is going to be coming for your spot and probably worthy of your spot. And so that was it was good to catch up with him for sure.
On the Osceola, we've got some stories from Tuesday's practice, more of Curt's observations, photo gallery from myself. Curt's got some videos, sights and sounds from those early portions of practices where we're able to take video. Obviously, you're not going to get video of the 11-on-11s. That's what everybody would like to see. But if you want those written observations, what Curt and Jerry and Pat saw as we watch practice, they're in our Osceola subscriber practice report there, written by Curt Weiler. Florida State will be back on the practice field Thursday afternoon. Scrimmage number 1 of the spring will be Saturday morning. As of right now, we're told that is a closed scrimmage. Possible that Florida State might open that up, but again, for now, closed, and we'll get to talk to the coordinators and Mike Norvell afterwards for a full breakdown of what they saw.
Yeah, the interesting thing with that, I mean, he talked pretty candidly about, I think he's like, especially in the first scrimmage, he was like, I'm not expecting Jordan Travis to do much. He kind of talked about, I mean, you need to keep Jordan fresh, but it's also kind of not for Jordan. I think it's a valuable time to see how AJ Duffy, how Tate Rodemaker, how maybe even Brock Glenn do with the first team in those reps, because Jordan's taken obviously the majority of those through 4 practices. I feel like we haven't talked about Jordan a lot, and I don't want that to come off as a condemnation of like he hasn't looked good. I think it's just like he caught us off guard last offseason with like, oh, I think he is taking another step, and obviously that translated into the season. I think it's just kind of you expect it from Jordan now, and I think he's been good. It's not to say like lack of talking about him is an indictment of what he's looked like by any means. It's just that I think I don't know. I think as funny as it is, there are other people y'all would rather hear more about than Jordan, because Jordan's kind of, I think, a known commodity at this point. If he unlocks another level, if he has another level, it's kind of crazy to think about. That's great. But I mean, even if he doesn't, what he was last year is more than good enough for this team.
I think what impresses me about Jordan is he's very consistent. That can be boring, I think, at times when you're going through a prolonged camp or a spring. But he's very consistently good. He definitely flashes. He doesn't make as many mistakes. There are highs, there aren't lows with Jordan. The other thing that was funny is you wrote that he was a 6th-year college player in your observations. And I literally was doing it on my fingers because I'm trying to think through it in my head. There's no way he has been in college 6 years. But again, when you factor in that Louisville season, he is a very seasoned veteran. So, I thought that was interesting that Norvell was very candid about he wants to see the young quarterbacks in some pressure roles, probably a scrimmage inside Doak Campbell Stadium if the weather is agreeable for the Seminoles on Saturday morning. So we'll see how that plays out. And of course, we'll have more on FSU football on Friday when we talk on Seminole Sidelines. And then, of course, check in on the site throughout the days when we talk about Florida State football recruiting, and more. Okay, well, the delegation from Ireland, some folks who live and work in Florida and are part of the Ireland delegation made the trip to Tallahassee. Some folks as far as truly from Dublin and Ireland made the trip over. Love the accents. Senator Mark Daly, I'm not sure what he is a senator of over in Ireland, but he has a great sense of humor, very charming, and a wonderful voice. So it was really cool to hear a lot of things from the delegation. I won't lie to you, there was not a lot of news when we met with these folks Tuesday at the press conference. The big overall takeaway was just there is a love of college football and welcoming American fans to Ireland. It's clearly a big sports tourism venture that they have created to open the doors to Dublin, to the country, very welcoming society. And I think the one other takeaway was what one of the gentlemen said. I believe it was John Anthony, who just said Florida State was very much wanted. There were some other schools in the mix, but they slow played a few of them just because potentially Florida State Georgia Tech was an option that they very much desired for this game. Curt, you talked to a lot of these people too. Just some of your takeaways from that meeting on Tuesday.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, he said, I think John Anthony did during the 2022 game that I think it was an SEC head coach reached out, an SEC AD reached out, two conference commissioners reached out to kind of, be like, hey, like, when can we get in here? This is something that interests us. But he said, I mean, he outright was kind of like, we kind of slow played them because we wanted Florida State. And I think some people would maybe rather that not be said, because obviously if Georgia Tech's the one giving up the home game, I don't think they kind of want it said of like Florida State is the draw, but I think it's known. I mean, Mike Norvell talked about believing that they'll paint the streets of Dublin garnet and gold. And I mean, they've talked about, I think, interesting thing, Notre Dame's, I think, third game there is coming up this year. And what I think he said is that every time Notre Dame's gone, there's been a larger contingent. I think he said they're expecting like 40,000 total Americans for that Notre Dame Navy game in August this year, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, when you think about it, I think it speaks to the word of mouth of a trip and experience like this. I think a big part of it too, I mean, why I think Mike Norvell wanted to do it. I think the now of it, I mean, the 2024 season works with, it'll get them a third bye. The way the schedule looks like it's going to line up. I mean, for a team that's kind of a lot of new faces stepping into new roles, it doesn't seem especially intimidating start to the season, especially after some of the last few. But yeah, I mean, he talked about the experience. I know John Anthony talked about, I think he said history tells us that like at least 75% of each team the players won't have passports and won't have left the country. And I know that applied to all three of the players who we talked to after: Pat Payton, Marquise Douglas, and Azaria Thomas. None of them have their passports. None of them have been outside the country. And I know a part of this, Mike Norvell talked about kind of being sure. He didn't say the opponent. I know it's expected to be Boston College. He talked about kind of like that, the importance of, I think that's a week 0 game. And then in week 1, they're not going to play until I think Labor Day night. And I think they're going to host Boston College is the expectation for that one. So it gives them 9 days between games. And a big part of that, obviously, I think, is getting back, is dealing with jet lag and all that. But it's also, I mean, Mike Norvell said yesterday, he's like, I wanted to make sure we could do that so we could get an extra day in Dublin. And truly, once the game is over, let the players like experience this and get the most out of this and make it not just be about just going over there for a game for the team. And I mean, that I think is music to a lot of the players' ears, I have to imagine, because it's a lot to go through if it were just for a game,
Yeah, everybody that we've talked to has pushed that they are selling the experience, not just for the fans. It's the experience for the players, something that they will remember for a lifetime. And, you can see potentially guys will return for a reunion 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Hey, remember this game and that win. And, oh, yeah, that trip to Ireland was pretty cool, right? So I think there's a lot there. And one of the things John Anthony mentioned to me afterwards was they get a lot of phone calls from ADs and administrators, a lot of people who are very, very interested, a lot of coaches when they find out not so interested because it is a routine disruption when you are flying that far across the world. But one thing that I think is a possibility, and we haven't talked to Mike Norvell about it. It's just a theory that I'm kind of playing around with. Does a week 0 game really help Florida State in that, yes, it's national exposure. They expect this is a 4 million plus game on a ESPN or ABC, but you get an extra week of practice. You get to start camp in July yet again with a young team in 2024. This team will not have Jordan Travis. He's a 6th-year guy. We know he's not going to come back. They're going to be replacing a lot of players at various position groups. You can think about those who made the decision to come back for 2023. They are most likely going to have productive seasons and not come back in 24. So does Mike Norvell want that added practice time that comes with a week 0 game? I think that's a really interesting maybe storyline and something that he would say is part of his kind of long-term planning and thought process about why this type of game makes a lot of sense for Florida State, the players and the program.
You wonder if a trip like this for a team that's going to have so many new starters is a bonding experience too. I mean, especially with the experiences on the tail end of it, does that bring a team together that it's not to say they're not together, but if they're installing a new quarterback and a few new wide receivers and a number of new defensive linemen starters and maybe a number of new DBs, I mean, I think that, that speaks to, I think, a possibility of that playing a role for sure as well.
All right. Well, again, more football talk Friday on Seminole Sidelines. And, of course, always on the Osceola. You can catch all of our stories and ask us questions, comment, chat with readers, all that good stuff that we offer on the Osceola.com. Okay, we're not going to focus a ton on the baseball team's loss to Florida on Tuesday night, but it was not a great night for the bullpen. You see the line there, 5 innings pitched, 8 earned runs, 6 walks, 10 hits. Oh my goodness, that 8th inning was very, very difficult to watch. Some positives, if you are looking for a few positives in a 4-run loss to a rival. Ben Barrett, again, looked very, very good. 4 quality, efficient innings there. He was maxed out at about 56 pitches from what Link Jarrett said. So that's why they needed to go to the bullpen. This was the first time we've seen a lineup this year with Diomez Ross in center, McGuire Holbrook as your DH, Cam Smith at third base was back after missing the series over the weekend. Very much need to stay healthy. If there's a storyline with Florida State, it's they have to stay healthy to maybe maximize whatever they can from this team, whether you're a pessimist or an optimist at this point. It is up to however you run. But Curt, your thoughts on a little bit on Tuesday and maybe where this team is.
Yeah, I think I'll take the blame for this one because I know I stayed behind at Hauser to write my observations and do some other things after practice. And when I left, it was 5-1. And it quickly became 5-2 and snowballed from there, obviously. And when I came home to do in part the Front Row Knowles interview with Tom Block and KJ. And it was 5-4 when we started. And by the time we'd finished our 2 segments, it was 9-5. The damage had been done, so to say. So I'll take the blame. Yeah, it's a tough one. You knew how good that Florida lineup was. I think you always thought 5 runs wasn't going to be enough, and Florida State had chances for more. I mean, throughout the game, they had more chances to pad that lead. Florida was kind of chipping away. I think they had 1 run for 4 straight innings, and then finally broke through that 5 spot, and obviously through Jackson Bomeister. I know it was a scheduled bullpen day for him, so not by any means a panic move, but it really does speak to the depth of this lineup or this bullpen, and something that we've talked about, that Link Jarrett's talked about, that I know, I mean, it's the state of things for them that I'm sure the Friday starter probably throws on Tuesday normally. It's probably like a scheduled bullpen day between starts, but that's normally done pre-game. It is never done in a game, and it speaks to the state of the team that they had to throw their Friday starter in the 8th inning of a midweek game. And I know Jackson Bomeister, I'm sure, wanted to, because I mean he wants to play in that game. I think I wrote a story at my last job last year about, I mean, he wouldn't normally get to face Florida as a Friday starter because these are all midweek games, but Yeah, I mean, he was fairly close. I mean, inheriting the bases loaded jam too is fairly close. I mean, that ground ball was not far out of Jordan Carrion's reach from getting an out, if not two. But it is tough. I mean, that's a really good Florida team, especially a really good Florida lineup. Ben Barrett did do a remarkable job. I'm curious. We could talk a little about. I'm curious what you do with him now, because your lineup's in a place now where you don't need his bat as badly. And I know you've just not been getting what you needed out of the Sunday spot in the rotation. I wonder if maybe not this week. I don't know if his pitch count will allow it, but if next week he's a guy who may be able to be stretched out at least to some capacity as maybe a Sunday starter for them.
I've argued that nobody was pushing Carson Montgomery for that Sunday number 3 role. Now officially Ben Barrett is pushing for that number 3 role. I'm totally in agreement with you. So you're right. The timing may not line up for Ben to run out there, say, Sunday at Virginia. It may not line up. It may line up. Who knows? We don't have a definitive rotation. Link Jarrett was saying that Wyatt Crowell will pitch today, Wednesday afternoon at some point. He's doing a little bit better each day. Link Jarrett has not really been definitive on what the injury is, what has kind of prompted Wyatt to miss a start. So that's a little bit of a mystery, but Link has been, I think, very, very forthcoming on injuries and availability. And he really wants Wyatt Crowell to be out there. He knows that the Seminoles need him to be out there. I want to wrap up just briefly on Jackson. Go ahead.
Okay. No, you do that. Then we can talk about Wyatt.
Yeah. I was alarmed in the moment that Florida State had to go to Jackson. Yep. I think it was more of that was not a necessity, but their hand was forced, I think, just because you don't have that depth in the bullpen. Jamie Arnold went out there, and it was not Jamie Arnold's night. He faced a couple batters. I think it was 4, only got 1 out. So then Jackson has to go out there. And I thought they were going to go to Jackson for maybe 1 or 2 hitters, potentially get a couple ground balls, maybe a double play, get out of the inning, and then you move on to an Andrew Armstrong in the 9th. A lot of those singles that Jackson gave up were those seeing eye singles. You know, they weren't great hits. They were just hit where the fielders ain't, to use the old baseball kind of colloquialisms. They were not great hits, but they were functional hits. And I just didn't want to see Jackson out there for 5 batters and potentially kind of ruin that confidence going into the weekend. But again, this was an opportunity. Jackson went to Chuck Ristano, went to Link Jarrett, said, I want to get an inning. If you guys feel like you can get me in there, only pitched 60, I think, on Friday night against BC. So he felt like there was an opportunity to run out there. Now back to the rotation, because we know Link has to put Wyatt Crowell in that rotation somewhere. If you are drawing this up, Curt, or whether you would draw it up or whether you think Link will do this, how does it go? Does it go Wyatt potentially on Friday, and then how does Saturday and Sunday potentially work out?
No, so I think it's going to be Jackson, at least for this week. I think it's Jackson Friday again, because I think, the fact that Jackson threw yesterday and Wyatt's throwing today means, that kind of lines up, I feel like, for the Friday, Saturday bullpens of keeping them in the same order. I think you want to make sure. So the thing with Wyatt, now I know Link, for his forthcoming, as he's been about kind of timeline stuff, he hasn't been especially forthcoming about the injury. I know, kind of the problem with Wyatt making the jump he did from high leverage reliever to starter is there's always going to be a bit of a turnaround when it comes to pitch count. Over 3 games, over 11 days against South Florida, FGCU, and Pittsburgh, he threw 58, 94, and 100 pitches. That's what? Nearly 250 pitches? Or no, I think it's 252 pitches in 11 days. That's not anything he's ever done before. And it's not something I think anybody wants him to do, but it's kind of, again, out of necessity. So I would like to think maybe now, with the week off, you hope that he's in a place where he can just stay in that starter spot the rest of the way, whatever day it is, and be good there. And just the transition once you get in season was always going to be tougher if you're not skipping a relief appearance where you'd use him like they did in that FGCU series to close that one out. But yeah, it's It's tough just from a standpoint of what do you do, and I would think, I mean, we'll see how Ben Barrett turns around after throwing about 60 pitches, right? Did he throw 56, or I forget how many exactly he threw, but I think the ideal for me right now would probably be Jackson, Wyatt, and Ben, if you can throw Ben on Sunday. Carson is not working in the weekend rotation. I think that's been proven time and time again. I know I wasn't there Sunday, but you kind of talked about, I think Link came about as close as he's going to kind of dogging a player pretty indirectly after Sunday's game, after I know another underwhelming performance by Carson. And I mean, we've seen Carson do well in the bullpen. We did last year as in a closer role. It suited him. It was probably the best extended period of time he's had in a Florida State uniform. So maybe he is better in that role. I mean, no doubt he has closer type stuff. If maybe a smaller sample size of outing is better for him, and then maybe you can get him multiple times in a weekend.
Yeah, I think the key for Carson is to not view a move to the bullpen as a demotion. It's a chance to rechannel your energy, get the mental mindset and focus right. He's had some really, really good innings. Can he be a lights out closer, a 1.2 inning type of closer? Because he could go a little bit longer than just, 3 outs. There are some options there for Carson. His stuff is electric. I'd say it's the best of any right-hander on the staff, while Wyatt has the best stuff of any left-hander on the staff. Just in my view, you need, bottom line for Florida State baseball, this is how I feel, regardless of, again, whether you're the pessimist or the optimist, you need Wyatt Crowell healthy. You need the lineup to stay healthy. And again, Tuesday was the first time they played with this full lineup all season. And you need to be patient in player development. I think the reason why I say that is Ben Barrett is a guy who is developing in front of our eyes. How he pitched down at UCF, how he pitched against Florida. How he's hit. There are lots of candidates. There are lots of freshmen. Ryan Dennison is a young freshman right-hander who we think is developing too. They are going to get better as they get more and more appearances. I'm not trying to I know people are very critical of where Florida State baseball is through 21 games, almost getting close to half of a season. But if you're looking for some optimism, you have not had a healthy team of late these last couple of weeks. You have not had Wyatt Crowell. If you get those things consistently, this baseball team is one that you will probably enjoy watching a lot better. The errors still need to be cut down quite a bit. That 4 errors on a Sunday is not what you want to see from this team. But Nander being back at second, I think that's where he's a little bit of a better fit. Cam at third, Jordan at short. That's probably the best third, short, second scenario that we're seeing from Florida State baseball as far as just where they can settle in and develop over this long haul. So Florida State at Virginia Friday night, and then some afternoon games Saturday and Sunday. All those games will be on ACC Network Extra. As we wrap up here, a couple promos for some of our stories we've got. Jerry Cutts has a good read. If you are a Florida State baseball or basketball season ticket holder, softball, you'll want to read this story because it's a good explainer about a new ticket priority policy. It's going to be in place starting in the fall of 2023 in some of the sports, in 2024 in a few of the other sports, including baseball. So again, it's a lot to explain out loud, but I want you to read that story because it will explain some of your new requirements as far as booster donations and such. Okay, Pat Burnham's got some recruiting updates on the Osceola.com. He checked in with a couple of prospects who were at Tuesday's practice. Of course, there'll be more prospects coming in Thursday afternoon. We'll also have full updates from Thursday's practice. That'll be practice number 5 for the Seminoles. We'll have that up on the Osceola, as well as some photos, videos, sights and sounds, things like that. I think that's it for our show today. Again, thanks for joining us on the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. You've been watching either on YouTube, on Facebook, or Twitter. You can always catch us on demand. You can go to the Osceola. We'll have all the podcast archived. You can always listen on the Apple podcast app or the Spotify app, your favorite streaming platforms and all that there. Curt Weiler, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time yet again. I'm Bob Ferrante. Take care. Enjoy your Wednesday.